Greetings, fellow tarot travelers, tripping through the tetrahedral triptych of cards I shall now lay before you. I'm Tarot Torch, and today we're going to talk about the Yellow Vest riots in Paris. On November 24th, 2018, Paris riots had grown enormously. The New York Times on Saturday said thousands of the so-called Yellow Jackets named for, now get this, the fluorescent road safety vests that all French drivers must carry in their vehicles, converged on Paris for a second weekend to protest a rise in fuel taxes and to express general discontent with the fiscal burden in one of the most highly taxed states in Europe, where taxes represent over 45% of GDP. The numbers had dropped sharply from the preceding week's several 100,000 protesters. The police estimated there were about 8,000 in Paris and more than 80,000 across the country on Saturday. The police used Saturday 5,000 tear gas grenades, more than one per minute. It's unheard of, according to Paris Police Chief Michael Delpuech, and the firefighters have extinguished more than 100 fires. The human toll is 31 people injured, 24 among the demonstrators, one more seriously in hand, probably trying to pick up a grenade, and 7 among law enforcement, including a person seriously injured. 103 people were arrested after the violence that occurred during the Parisian gathering of Yellow Vests. This configuration is absolutely unprecedented. On the one hand, by the totally improvised character, no organizer, no interlocutor, it is also unprecedented by the duration of the event. Now, this is very ironic. I remember when they passed the law for these Yellow Vests, and the French government basically made a charade of things. They said people are being run over on the streets regularly, which was not true. And they passed a law that everybody must have a yellow safety vest in their car, but that the government would help to pay for the yellow vests because they didn't want to affect the consumer too much and demand too much of them. So they created a subsidy. Well, it's a sweetheart deal for the Inside Yellow Vest Corporation. And the French public paid, €8 for their vests that they had to have mandatorily in their car, not unlike seatbelt laws. But the vests possibly cost as much as €20. And who paid the difference with the subsidy? Well, the French people, of course, in taxation. And then what happened is, the EU passed carbon taxes which were based on population levels, and France accepted all these people coming in from Syria, which increased their population demographics. So the carbon tax increases, which means fuel taxes have to increase, but the arrivers don't have cars. They're refugees. And they lived in Paris, where they used the metro and public transit. The people who paid the tax are the hardworking white French people off in the countryside, and they don't want to pay taxes for a bunch of immigrants that are taking over their country and ruining their culture. And then when these people in the countryside send their children to the city of Paris to enjoy themselves and see a movie, many of them got raped and attacked. These are the stories that the Yellow Vests are telling. I'm not on one side or the other. I'm just describing the different arguments at hand. Riots then occurred in Belgium on November 30th, and the Belgian police fired water cannons in central Brussels on Friday to drive back protesters inspired by France's Yellow Vest movement, who hurled rocks and firecrackers near the Prime Minister's office. Police made dozens of arrests, and protesters destroyed at least 2 police vans as what started as a peaceful but unauthorized demonstration. Lacking clear leadership and largely promoted on social media, the riot descended into violence when people, many masked or hooded, tried to breach police lines. For 3 hours, crowds complained about fuel prices, and a squeeze on living standards had disrupted traffic and walked on the streets. Police said they had arrested about 60 people before the violence, mostly for blocking roads or carrying large fireworks. The disturbances lasted for over an hour before riot police surrounded and then arrested some demonstrators, while the rest of the crowd dispersed. Police put the total number of protesters at about 500. So as you can see, it spread from Paris, and then it went up to Belgium, and it was throughout the country of France. Then more rioting erupted on December 1st with dramatic scenes at l'Arc de Triomphe. Protesters took the famous landmark from the police amid rubber bullets and smoke grenades. Injured compatriots were carried away in the arms of fellow protesters in clouds of smoke that made it all seem like a war for liberation. Protests dominated the entire Champs-Élysées, a fashionable shopping district where national parades are held. Bonfires burned throughout the night in a no-man's land of dystopic protests. Then on Sunday, December 2nd, the French government considers imposing a state of emergency to prevent riots after 400 people were arrested on Saturday. Heavy clashes at the Place de l'Étoile at the foot of the Arc de Triomphe, where protesters left behind a spray paint message stating that the Yellow Vests will triumph. 133 people were wounded, 23 were law enforcement in Saturday's rioting to rescind the new gas tax. Then ambulance drivers and student protests while the roads were blocking the roads while roadblocks were also created for fresh produce distributors, and this was blocked on the 3rd and 4th of December. At that point, Macron decides to delay the fuel tax increase for 6 months. On December 5th, Macron repeals the gas tax completely, as 200 high schools are roadblocked or 200 high schools roadblock or disrupt the high schools' activities. Oil processing plants and fuel depots are roadblocked, and major road access points are blockaded in major cities like Aix-en-Provence, Montpellier, and Nimes, as protesters make further demands. On the December 8th, Saturday, in the 4th week of rioting, armored vehicles were dispatched in Paris, and up to 700 people were arrested as protests got more violent. On December 11th, thousands of Paris's 120 high school students marched on the Champs-Élysées on Black Tuesday, profiting from the momentum of the Yellow Vests protests. Their enormous protest numbers were against recent policy changes in education. Well, there you have it. It's almost like a revolution in Paris and in France. Of course, Macron's position is utterly secure. Since Charles de Gaulle established the Fifth Republic, there's just no way of removing him. He's in office, and he's got his own party in power, much like Trump did with the Senate. So there's just no way to remove Macron. And to be honest, this Yellow Vest movement is a far right-wing movement that is anti-immigrant. And they make a reasonable argument, but they are definitely on the right side of the spectrum, and there are countervailing left sides of the spectrum who also have their arguments opposing them. So today I decided to go to the Tarot de Marseille Edition Millennium, because these are millennium issues, and this deck was made in the year 2017. And so being a very recent deck, it is going to help us to address this recent issue. After all, the rioters had no leader. It's unheard of before. All done on social media. Everybody just showed up. They created lists of demands. It's as though leaders were selected from the crowd or people stood forward. We don't know if they're real leaders or if they're policemen in yellow jackets. But they ended up making demands, and the tax was removed, at least for the time being. But we've never seen this before, where the people have had just enough. They don't need to have a movie star on a stage or a speaker on the stage telling them what to chant and what to think. The people have had enough, and they went to their cars, pulled out the yellow vests that they never used for years on end, with these yellow vests sitting in the back seat forever, put their yellow vests on that the French government makes them own, and went up to a police car and burned it. And finally, their yellow vests got to be used. I hope you gather that this is really a very ironic and humorous thing that they're doing. So the question we're going to ask the cards today is, what about this yellow vest movement? Is this what the future holds for France and maybe the world? Where when people have had just enough, they can't afford rent and food any longer, that they're just going to mass in the street, burn the cars, overthrow civil order, and then be persecuted by the police, water cannons, tear gas, and rubber bullets? Is this the future of the world that we're in? The first card is the Star. The second card, the Three of Wands. And the third card, the Ace of Coins. So the highest arcane card is the Star. In the past, and we can always look at the far left as the past, although it doesn't need to be the past, we have the idea here that France and Paris lived beautifully in their art with their cafes and with their monarchs and with their art and their beauty and their Parisian lifestyle as stars of Europe. But at this point in history, with the Three of Wands, where we are now, a choice of direction has been made. The people have had enough. And irrespective of what the government wants to do, if the people will not follow their government, if they will not obey their laws, if the police will not do what they're ordered to do, and if the military will not follow rules, then the government is a useless, meaningless toy that needs to be abandoned. But evidently some kind of choice has been made. And in this case, I would say a choice by the people. The outcome of all of this is going to be greater wealth. Now, I think that's a very surprising outcome. But maybe one of the biggest problems Europe is currently facing is too much taxation. On one hand, we need to have the government tend to our streets, give us a military, give us police, give us the things that we need to function as a society and monitor trade, because we don't want corruption to take over. But on another level, we don't want government to take over with too heavy of taxation, destroying the economy. And so a balance has to exist. And in France, the rule of thumb has always been tax the people until they scream. And they're screaming. They've had enough. They're burning police cars on the street. They're taking the most fashionable shopping district in the world and turning it into a war zone. And so, if Macron and the French government work to help understand what it is that the Yellow Vests are saying, because after all, the left had been in power for so long, and I'm not saying that the right belongs in power, but everybody holds a particle of truth. And if their truth is addressed, evidently there'll be greater wealth for France. You know, if you tax people too much, they can't buy more goods. Lower the taxes, let the people buy more goods, and have a healthier economy. And it's really not an issue of right versus left. It has to do with creating a standard of living where people want to participate in life. And if we tax them to death, if we persecute them to death, if we are constantly watching them and arresting them in police states that have existed throughout the planet, whether it was the USSR, Communist China, Hitler's Germany, the people aren't happy. They don't buy as many goods. They just try to survive and wait till the regime falls or changes. To have a living, active economy, and it all comes down to the money. Realistically, France needs to listen to its people.